Meeting will come to order. Want to welcome all of you here today. We're grateful for your attendance, grateful to the people at the panel for being here with us. Mrs. Yeung, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you all for having me here today. My name is Miriam Yeung, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. We are the country's only multi-issue organization dedicated to building a movement for social justice and human rights for Asian and Pacific Islander women and girls in the United States. I am also a Chinese immigrant from Hong Kong and the proud mother of 2 wonderful daughters who are doing a very good job of staying quiet. On behalf of NAPAWF and the dozens of women's rights, Asian American and Pacific Islander, human rights, civil rights, and reproductive groups that stand with me, I strongly urge the members of this Congress to oppose H.R. 3541, otherwise known as Prenda. Forgive me for allowing my Brooklyn roots to show just a little bit when I say, Prenda is nothing but a pretender. Prenda pretends to fight against racial discrimination by actually perpetuating discrimination against women of color. This bill undermines and calls into question our ability as women of color to make decisions about our own bodies. The truth is, most Americans believe that a woman knows what is best for her and her family. But this bill places unfair scrutiny on African American and Asian American women around our motives for seeking abortion care. This scrutiny promotes racial profiling by pushing doctors to assume African American and Asian American women are seeking abortions because of the race or sex of their fetus. Women of color already face difficulty accessing health care and have poorer health outcomes. African American women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women, and their unintended pregnancy rate is almost twice that of white women. Vietnamese women are more than 5 times as likely to die from cervical cancer, and Korean women have the highest uninsurance rates of any ethnic or racial group. Unfortunately, this measure would make healthcare outcomes for women of color even worse. Making abortion harder to obtain exacerbates racial disparities in healthcare. Prenda pretends to speak the language of women's equality, but unfortunately the voting records of its supporters do not strengthen civil rights, women's rights, or the rights of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. For example, this year alone, sponsors voted to defund family planning, eliminate funding for the United Nations Population Fund, ban abortion coverage in state health insurance exchanges, and allow providers to refuse abortion care even when a woman's life is in danger. Sponsors of this bill did not support the Children's Health Insurance Program Reauthorization Act, and some would even require hospitals to report possible undocumented persons that seek treatment, thus preventing immigrants from seeking emergency health care. Prenda pretends to address the issue of sex selection, but does nothing to address the root causes of son preference or gender inequity. Son preference is a symptom of deeply rooted social biases and stereotypes about gender. Gender inequity cannot be solved by banning abortion. In fact, the United Nations Population Fund, the World Health Organization, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNICEF, and UN Women have issued a clear joint statement that countries have an obligation to ensure that these injustices, meaning son preference, are addressed without exposing women to the risk of death or serious injury by denying them access to needed services such as safe abortion. Asian American and Pacific Islander women know that gender inequities do exist and are working in culturally competent ways to provide long-term sustainable solutions. We are working with members of our own community to empower women and girls, thereby challenging norms and transforming values. For example, we are carrying out programs that build the leadership of women, improve our economic standing, create better access to health care, and ending gender-based violence against us. We need your support to put Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders back to work, since our community experiences the longest duration of unemployment of all races and ethnicities. We need your support on current bills, such as the Reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, the Health Equity and Accountability Act. We need humane immigration reform and many other policy efforts which would help my community. In summary, Prenda pretends to eliminate racial and gender discrimination, but is a thinly veiled attempt to limit abortion access for women of color. Instead of curbing women's rights and exacerbating racial discrimination, I welcome all members of Congress to work with NAPAWF and all other organizations that stand with me to pass legislation that truly results in racial justice and gender equality. Let's really work together to improve the lives of women of color and to make this country a better place for daughters like mine. But let's not continue to pretend that this bill does that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yeung.
Ms. Yeung, I'd like to talk with you for a minute about what I consider the most critical part of Roe versus Wade, and that is with respect to the state's important and legitimate interests in life, the compelling point is viability, because the fetus then presumably has the capability of meaningful life outside the mother's womb when you reach viability. So that means to me that the Supreme Court has made clear in this case from 1973 that the government may not prohibit abortion prior to fetal liability. Would you comment on that part of the case for me, please?
Thank you, Mr. Conyers, for the question. I will admit, firstly, that I am no legal scholar by any means, but I do know that there are many of my colleagues in the room who are from the Center for Reproductive Rights or the ACLU who have submitted comments and testimony who can talk about the legal standing. I was actually more of a science person in my upbringing, and that may be a stereotype, but I actually was pretty good at math and science. And what I do know scientifically is that a fetus cannot live outside of a woman's body before 24 weeks.
That's not bad for a person without medical training or legal training. Let me ask you this, Ms. Yeung. In the communities where you work, what are some of the actual barriers to women's comprehensive health care?
Yes, I am really pleased that there is this hearing which focuses on the needs of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. We have always wanted this sort of support and attention. Particularly, as many of us know, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders make up only 6% of the U.S. Population. We often have to fight for our airtime. And there is a huge need, of course, for disaggregated information about our community, so information that treats the different ethnicities as separate. So I'm also pleased that this issue allows us to look at to look at different ethnic communities, particularly Chinese, Korean, and Indian communities in this case. But we have really serious issues that the Asian Pacific Islander community have identified. As I mentioned in my testimony, we know that Asian American women are, particularly Vietnamese women, suffer from cervical cancer at extraordinarily high rates. We have disproportionate rates of hepatitis B infection, which would require more attention. We know that Filipino women are at higher risk for breast cancer than black or white women. Mm-hmm. We know that also that Asian American and Pacific Islander young people are targets for school bullying at disproportionate rates and higher rates than other race and ethnicities. And when you do look at disaggregated Asian Pacific Islander data, we see in many places that young API women and girls have lower self-esteem than their counterparts. And as I mentioned before, we also have long-term unemployment to face. These are all issues that are real issues that I would submit and ask that the Congress really do help us address.
Thank you very much. Do you believe that this bill would help women, would liberate them? I mean, after all, where we got the names of two great civil rights people I'll never know, but do you think that this is going to help liberate women in their struggle?
On the contrary, I believe this bill would hurt women, and women of color in particular.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank the gentleman.